When you're faced with death, it brings up a different perspective, right? Like, well, my dad just passed. There's no guarantees I have tomorrow. Do I have everything set in place for me in my life?
What's up, y'all? This is Ian with the Afterlife Insurance Podcast, and today's guest is Jeff Kamke. Jeff is the host of the Wealth Energetics Podcast. He's got his own YouTube channel, and he works alongside me in the Life 180 team. I'm super excited to share this conversation with you because Jeff and I touched on a number of really fascinating topics, including the passing of his father, how he dealt with that on a spiritual and energetic level, and what that meant in his day-to-day life. Jeff gets super candid and shares about how this experience has changed his outlook on the future and how he plans on preparing for the inevitability of his own passing. We also explore how the mind, body, and spirit are interconnected, and by getting our finances in order and having a proper plan set in place, that can help us in all areas of our life. I really enjoy having these kind of deep conversations, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. So let's just get into it. What's up, everybody? This is Ian with the Afterlife Insurance Podcast. And today I have a special guest, Jeff Kamke, and I'm super excited to talk to him and see where this conversation goes. We are both part of the team of Life 180, the insurance agency. That's how we met. And, it's one of those things where I didn't really know what I was getting into and the kind of people I would meet coming into a life insurance agency for the first time. I'm relatively new to the industry, and I'm super grateful to have met not only Jeff, but everybody on the team is super cool. But Jeff in particular, we share a lot of commonalities outside of the professional realm where we're focused on serving people and helping people improve their finances through specialized life insurance and helping people protect their families, quite frankly, as well. That's a big aspect and focus of our professional life. But we also each have quite a strong spiritual aspect to us. And we've both done a lot of self-development and dabbled and explored different modalities of healing and different aspects of spirituality. So I'm really excited to talk to Jeff today and looking forward to seeing where this conversation goes. So thanks, Jeff, for coming on today.
Absolutely. And I've been looking forward to this for a while. And ever since we've gotten to know each other, knowing that we can talk the boring life insurance stuff, which really truly isn't that boring, but then intermingle all the rest of the stuff of personal growth, spiritual growth. I think this is going to be a fantastic conversation that we don't get to have very often with like-minded people at this level.
Likewise, recently you've made some content and you've been talking about a personal situation that you've gone through revolving around the passing of your father. Mm-hmm. And I know based on the conversations we've had and watching some of your content, that it was a rather unexpected experience for you and your family. From what I understand, you didn't expect him to transition as soon as he did. Mm. And also he was in the insurance industry. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your experience around your dad's passing, like how you're able to manage that and the more tangible aspects of what that entailed when he passed.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably go the whole time just talking about all this because there's a lot that went into it and everything. But yeah, a little over 2 months ago, my dad did pass away, and it was ultimately from high blood pressure and strokes that he had had. It was unexpected. He was doing on an upward trajectory for much of his care. He had a stroke just before Christmas of 2023. So it all happened within a couple months, and definitely emotionally and energetically was a big shock. I mean, I had a sense for the last couple of years that the end was in sight. Not that I felt like it was going to be within a year or two. I felt like it was the beginning of a 10 or 15 year decline like I've seen with my grandparents, or you just see in this day and age where it's just a slow regression. Yeah, there's some health challenges here and there, but not to where he's just going to be taken out. Well, that's not what happened. The choices that he had made to not exercise and change his diet and get to the real cause of what was going on with high blood pressure and some other health challenges. I think they just accumulated too much and got to the point where he had the stroke. The interesting thing, when my mom had called me late at night, just before bed, saying that they found him unconscious basically and they couldn't resuscitate him. And she had called me twice. Once was just to let me know that the nursing home where he was at, or like a rehabilitation center, where they had found him unresponsive. And then in the middle of that, I thought, because I have a background in bioenergetics, I've been doing that since like 2010, 2011. So I've developed my intuitive sense and my ability to do like remote energy work on people. And I've done a ton of treatments on my dad. And so I thought, ooh, I'm going to tune into my dad and see if I can just do like some balancing work on him. And I tune into him and I'm like, shit, he's gone. I could tell he wasn't there. His energy was not in his physical form that I'm used to tuning into. So then a few minutes later, my mom calls me back in tears and he passed. I couldn't revive him. I tried for like a half an hour and like, oh my gosh. So I'm the only child. So was my mom, my wife, my 2 kids that are 8 and 5. So initially it was like, okay, I got to just be strong and whatever. Well, then a day or so passes and it finally hits me. My dad's gone, and just as probably anybody that's ever had a loved one pass, it's crazy to process. You can't believe it's happened. You can't believe you're like in this new, feels like a dimension of life without that loved one. It just feels like everything's different and shifted and your thoughts are different and you're going through the emotional trauma of it all. And for me, I think the next morning when I woke up in like a panic, like I really never had what I assume would be called like a panic attack. And I was like, how do I overcome this? I have tools to help the nervous system and everything calm down. And even some of those tools, it took me a little bit to really break through to get myself where my nervous system was calmed down and be able to process things. I use tools like thought field therapy, which is like a tapping technique, and some bioenergetic work that gets into balancing a lot of different levels of the body. And throughout all that process, by like the second day, though, it was like my automatic response to thinking about my dad passing is I was just walking around crying, like shaking my head, just like, no, like I just can't believe it. And then I was having a good conversation with my wife. And then it was just almost like my dad spoke to me a couple times. And it wasn't like I was asking for it necessarily, like, oh, Dad, please speak to me if you're there or whatever. It just came out of the blue. And it was like the sense that he was just this, because he's on the other side. And I believe that, yes, his physical body is no longer there, but his soul lives on and he's still able to communicate. And even right after he passed, when we were in the bedroom up here all crying, I even felt his presence then. Like I could feel him in the room. And I've watched near-death experience videos where they talk about when they go to the light, they can see the hospital room and hear everybody, all the doctors and nurses in surgery, right? So I was experiencing that from the other side. I could feel my dad in the room, like I totally could. He was there for several minutes. So back to what I was saying though, he just had the energy of like being the sage master, where it didn't take him much to say his point, but his point came across in just a few words. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. And so the first thing that I think I remember him say was just, I'm here with you. And it was just like, I needed that reminder that he's still here and I can still feel him. And just because he's not in his physical body, we have the ability to communicate telepathically. Even though we're in 3D on Earth, we can communicate supernaturally. And so I have that belief, and I have done that plenty of times, like I said, with remote energy work. So to me, just because he's on the other side means that I still have that connection with him and he understands me more fully now. So we can have a different relationship moving forward. So that moment was interesting because he spoke to me like, I'm still here with you. And then it was like, from that point on, I'm like, okay, instead of shaking my head, no, like, I can't believe this. It was like, okay, this is just going to be a new dynamic of our relationship moving forward. Dad's on the other side. He can help me in a way that he couldn't before, and his physical limitations with programming from when he was little and all those limitations that we have growing up. And so I was like, okay, this is just going to be a different scenario moving forward. We had experienced something similar 4 years ago. My wife's dad had passed away, and a little bit longer of a time. It took just under a year for him to pass from open heart surgery and some cancer and stuff. But ever since then, we've noticed a ton of changes. That's like, Dad, you're up there on the other side. You must be pulling strings and doing stuff, because stuff in our life has shifted so much since he passed that I was getting excited about. It's like, okay, well, her dad's up there. Now my dad's up there. They could be like working together to just help us along, like point out things to us, and just whatever that process looks like. I don't understand it fully until we're on the other side to really grasp exactly how it could work. But that was the sense that I've had of like, okay, this is just going to be a new relationship moving forward with my dad. And then I think it was the second day after he passed, just out of nowhere, it was like I felt his presence really strong on my right side. And depending on what energy discipline you're in, the right side can mean like future, or it can mean the masculine side of you. And I felt my dad almost like touching my arm, but like energetically. And for the first few days, I felt like his left arm around my waist, like he was just right next to me, with me, going through, doing whatever. I was doing. And one of the times that I was driving actually to take my life insurance exam, because I've been in the industry for 5 or 6 years, but my wife was a licensed agent. I just did more of the marketing and some of that stuff. So I was taking my life insurance exam 2 days after my dad passed, and I'm on the road to do that. And all of a sudden I heard him again, just out of the blue, because when my dad first had his stroke, I was at the hospital all the time. I mean, as much as I possibly could be. And I heard him say, "You've been with me. Now it's my turn to be with you." And I was just like, oh my gosh, like just touched my soul in such a powerful way. It's like, okay, this is just the new relationship moving forward. And so even right now, I can still feel, it's been 2 months, I can still feel a real subtle presence on my right side still. It's kind of like, if you have your hand on your arm, your brain neurologically stops sending the signals that there's like a new sensation there. It stops doing that. So I feel like it's happened a little bit with that feeling on my right side, but it's still there. And since all this has happened, I'm going to be taking over my dad's senior health insurance business, which wasn't on the radar screen, wasn't really what I thought I would ever be doing, but it totally makes sense to pair that with what we're doing on the life insurance side, the financial strategies, to just help people in a more holistic way and look at other aspects and provide other benefits and services. So that whole process it's been very interesting to be able to have like energetic conversations with my dad and just say goodnight to him at night, and you just hear something back like, "Good night, son, love you." Like sometimes it's like, am I really making this up? Is this really true? But there's been enough of it where it's like, no, that's definitely not me coming up with. That's definitely dad from the other side. It's never been like I get like a paragraph or a chapter worth of information from my dad, but it's always been just a few little things here and there. And it's still hard going through it. It's not like because I'm in energy work and, know how to do all this. It's just been a breeze and no emotional upsets. Like, I mean, the other day I was walking into Sam's Club and I pulled out my Sam's card, and him and I always shared an account at Sam's Club. And it just hits me. I started bawling in the middle of Sam's Club because my dad's gone. So like, it still is reality. It's still a mourning process. There's still grieving, but I've been thankful for a lot of the energetic work that I know how to do, because it's accelerated a lot of that grieving process and not kept me dwelling on the negative aspects of it and how much I miss my dad, but being able to move forward with a new energy of like, hey, this is just a new relationship. It's a new dynamic. It's a new stage of life. Embrace it, move forward the best you can. You're going to have days where it sucks. You're going to have days where you're crying your eyes out. You're going to have days where you just want it to be what it was. And that's totally cool. But, more times than not, you're going to be embracing a new way of being and a new connection with somebody that you love dearly.
Wow, that's super powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your level of candidness around such a deeply felt and emotional experience and topic. Mm-hmm. I know, as you were speaking, I was reminded of my grandfather's passing, who also died very suddenly. I was 13 at the time. Mm-hmm. And having similar experiences of sensing that he was there in a way, and also knowing he was dead. I wasn't conscious of the reality that his spirit is going to live on, and that's going to continue to persist even if he's not in his body. So it was very confusing for me at the time. And I grew up in a very Orthodox Christian kind of an upbringing. So it was not something that was even on my radar. And when I was having that experience, I just had no context for it. Mm-hmm. And still to this day, every once in a while, I'll be usually when I'm in the mountains or when I'm hiking and I'm by myself, for whatever reason, when I get to an overlook or a peak and I maybe stop for a drink of water or just stop to chill and look out over the landscape, I can remember a handful of times where I get that sense, and it usually, for me, it comes up from behind, and I just know, oh, Grandpa's here with me. Mm-hmm. And it's undeniable to me. It's an experience that, like, it's not something that's tangible or that can be measured, or you can't put it in a cup. You can't take a photograph of it. And it's still equally as real. Trying to convince me that experience isn't real would be like trying to convince me that grass is not green. It is an absolute real experience. And you talked about near-death experiences and reading about people's reports of having these out-of-body experiences and then coming back in. I mean, at this point, there are hundreds and thousands of these experiences that people from across the world, all different kinds of backgrounds, different religions, it's a universally human experience. Yep. And it's undeniable at this point. And another aspect of what you were talking about, which I really appreciate, is the fact that you see this experience as a process, not only for your father who has passed, but also for yourself. You're allowing yourself to have the experience and honoring the experience. And despite the fact that you have tools and you have an understanding, and you conceptually, like psychologically, you know what's happening on an energetic level. And at the same time, that doesn't negate the emotional experience that you're going through. I think quite often it's been my experience in different spiritual situations, different circles, different groups of people, where for whatever reason, because certain people have a higher level of understanding, or maybe have certain tools or certain abilities spiritually or sixth sense, they really understand well what's going on, where they try to intellectualize their way out of it. And people don't allow themselves to have the emotional experience of grieving. One way to put it is like spiritual bypassing, using your spiritual tools to negate what's happening in the physical realm, or downplay it, or not give yourself the space that you need to go through this physical experience of grieving. And yeah, he's still there in a sense, but your body doesn't understand that. Your body has its own memory and its own understanding. And being able to allow your body to have its process and allow energy to flow through you, and not keep it bottled up and not try to manipulate it or put a cork on it and keep it down, just allowing yourself to have that experience, I think is very healthy. That's a natural part of the process. And trying to intellectualize your way out of the painful situation that you're in just makes the situation prolonged. And you can't get away from the pain or the grieving process. You can prolong it by not addressing it. Your approach and how you're handling the situation, from my perspective, and based on what you said, I think is really, really profound. And more people having that kind of mindset around it, allowing it to happen, I think that would alleviate a lot of stress and tension, and allow people to really let go of things from the past and continue to move on and live their life. Because I don't believe that my grandfather or your father ever wanted us to be grieving forever or be sad about the passing. And emotions come up from time to time, and I still, when I feel my grandpa near me, I still well up with tears. At this point, it's not sadness. It's like it's something close to sadness, but I don't know that I have a word for it, but that's always going to be a part of a process. And I don't think the ones that have passed and transitioned to the other side would ever want for us to be continuously sad over their passing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think ever since it first happened with me, one of the principles we've learned from Dr. Sue Morter, who's big into bioenergetics, and we've learned from her dad and her two brothers as well, to do a slightly different modality of just being grounded and doing what she calls central channel breathing, which I know has a lot of yogic principles. But, that just was one of the first things. Like, I have to ground this new energy of my dad not being physically present here anymore. It's such an extreme emotional shakeup that you go through. And like I mentioned, I definitely was having an anxiety attack. So like, I was trying to do central channel breathing, but the level of anxiety was so high that first few hours that I had to resort to like doing some tapping and a few other things that was able to break into that to get the emotions down enough to then I could start doing some grounding breath work and some other things to just start integrating your nervous system. That's what we've learned so much from Dr. Sue Morter, is like, whatever you're experiencing in life, whether it's the passing of someone, you lose your job, you have a financial upset, a divorce, a health crisis, whatever it is, like, you have to integrate that in your nervous system. And part of the reason that you have things pop up energetically, emotions or additional physical complaints that can come out of life's experiences, is because we haven't integrated it. We haven't been able to let that energy move through us. Like you mentioned, we tend to keep it compartmentalized. We want to stuff it down. We don't want to face it. We don't want to feel the feelings in their entirety. We can feel it a little bit, but then we want to run away. And if you can integrate the feelings in with whatever modality, there's a million modalities of what you can do to do that, but find some that resonate with you. I have the ones I like, but even my wife doesn't resonate with all the ones that I do, and vice versa. So it's a very individualized process of try different modalities, whether it's tapping or Reiki or meditation, whatever it is. Find ways that whatever upsets you've had in your life, figure out a way to integrate that and ground with that energy. And when you do, then the energy flows through you. It's not stuck in chakras or stuck in organs or tissues where 10, 20 years down the line, you're going to manifest a disease process because you didn't know what to do with those emotions. And I mean, it just goes back to the financial side on life insurance. We're not taught the right information. And when it comes to handling emotions and really what's going to make a difference in your life, we're not ever taught that we even have a sixth sense or an energetic part of our being, let alone how to use that and how to move through life's big upsets, because we're all going to have the big upsets. We're all going to have the traumas and the big intense emotions. So you have to take it upon yourself, much like on the financial side, to learn, how am I going to be empowered with my money? You have to do it with your body and your emotions and your energy of how can I be empowered with knowing what to do myself. Because if I go to a counselor or a psychologist, they're not going to more than likely get to the real root of it energetically. They can tell you how to manage it and figure out where it comes from, but to like truly release it energetically, you got to go deeper and figure out deeper ways to do that. And I've just found much of what we talked about so far with my dad, like that's been such a blessing to have known these techniques. I was thinking as we were going through this in the last couple months, like people that don't know about energy, people that don't know you could have a conversation with a dead loved one that's not weird and you're not like channeling the devil, because that's what some Christian people might say, like, oh, you better be careful about that. It's like, it's my dad. Get over yourself. And all that kind of stuff, just knowing how to handle emotions and dealing with the energetic clearing. Like, I can't imagine people that go through this and don't have any of those tools or any of that knowledge. That has got to be hell for people. And that's why I've been on my channel sharing this, because I know more people need to know this. More people need to talk about this. It needs to be like in the olden days. Nobody talked about sex. Well, obviously that's changed in today's world. Well, there's a lot of these areas of life that we still keep secretive and we don't talk about, and we don't. It's been an interesting process, even with my dad. Like right after it happens, all your family and friends are reaching out and so sorry. And then after the funeral, it like just stops, and you just get those random few people that are the closest people that still check in with you. And like that kind of falls away. And if you don't have tools to go beyond that outside support and managing it on your own, it's a really challenging process. I mean, it's been hard just with what I know. I can't imagine people that go through years straight of anxiety attacks every day because they lost a child or something in a terrible car accident, or I can't imagine it. So for me, not only is my passion sharing financial strategies that make a difference and a real result in your life, I can't separate out what I've learned from alternative healing and bioenergetics and how that relates to the other areas of your life that most people are looking to upgrade and up level in all those areas, not just one over the other. And I see so much of the time how they go hand in hand, and it's really hard to separate out money or relationships or health. They all play into each other, and it's a really dynamic, fun conversation to have on multiple levels.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you. I think we quite often don't acknowledge the fact that mind, body, and spirit are all intertwined. You cannot separate them. And if you're out of balance in any one of those areas, it's going to affect all areas of your life. If you're broke and your money isn't right, you're probably not going to be eating as well, and your physicality is not going to be optimal in most cases. If you are spiritually disconnected from the greater source energy and the things that are going on around you that you may not be able to see but are most definitely affecting you, if you're completely disconnected from that, whether or not you're consciously aware of it, and you're probably not, you're going to be getting tossed around and you're going to be really reactive to the things that are going on around you if you don't have any connection to the fact that, no, there's an energetic reality that I can't see with my physical eyes that is affecting me. I mean, that's undeniable. If you go into a comedy club and you go into an emergency room, you can feel the difference. Mm-hmm. It's undeniable. Nobody's going to tell you that I can't feel it. It's just the same to me. It's like, no, just sit there. It's undeniable. That goes along with like psychological development as well. If you're not doing the inner work and you've not progressed and have done self-exploration, how do you think you're going to be able to progress in the other areas of your life? So I think that's a really important point that you touched on. Like these things are all interconnected. Talking about the situation with the loss of your dad, or his transition, I should say, because he's not lost. It's like, where could he go? It's a transition. He's not in his body anymore. Yep. Talking about that in the same conversation as addressing your financial health and your the stability of your economic situation and your mental and emotional health, they're all intertwined. And I think I shared this with you, but man, for a long period of time, my career essentially was working in psychedelic ceremonies and helping facilitate different varieties of mushroom and ayahuasca ceremonies around the country, and traveled around the world. And I sat with a lot of people who would come into these spaces, into these ceremonies, whatever the situation was, and they were holding on to a trauma, a loss of a loved one, a loss of a spouse, a loss of a job, whatever it is. People have been holding on to experiences that they'd had decades in the past. And how that affected their entire life, like one event from 30, 40 years ago, how that can affect somebody's life every single moment of every single day, and not having the tools or the understanding or even the environment to be able to process that emotion and work through it, allow yourself to really experience it fully such that you can let go of it. You hit the nail on the head. There are so many people walking around with such deep wounds and emotional grief and emotional baggage and just pent up stuff, for lack of a better word, that if they had the tools and the understanding and the knowing that the reason I'm continuing to feel this is because I'm not actually feeling it. There's something that I'm missing here. I'm not able to integrate this. It's like you're stuck there, and that energy isn't able to go because it doesn't want to stay there. And it's not a personal thing. If you're experiencing something like that, you're not under attack. The loss of your loved one or whatever it is, that traumatic experience, while yes, you did feel it personally and it is a personal experience, the fact that energy is stuck with you, it's not because of you. It's because there's like a process that hasn't completed yet. And bringing awareness to that, and especially in the context of death, but in the context of other areas of life as well, it goes across the board. So that's a really important point, and I'm happy that you brought that up in that context. So moving forward, I'm curious how, knowing that your father was in the insurance industry, we touched on the intangible aspect of his passing and your experience around that. I'm also curious about how his passing, knowing that he was in the insurance industry, not life insurance particularly, but how you're able to, like, the effect that his passing has had on you in a more physical sense and in your family environment as well.
That's good. It's been an interesting thing, just knowing he's been in insurance for 20, 25 years. And in the beginning, he worked for Prudential. And then he he did some property casualty, so home and auto type stuff. And then about 15 years ago, I think he found his niche doing senior health. And it was interesting when I first learned about life insurance and the way that we do it, which is more in the infinite banking model. We're using maximum funded, cash value, dividend paying, permanent whole life insurance. And I remember talking to him about that. And he's like, I don't know, I've never heard about that. And he'd been in the insurance industry for 20 years or so at the time. And that was my first real clue in of like, you could be in the insurance industry and still not know the full gamut of what's out there. And we see that in health, right? A doctor's program, drugs, surgery, radiation. This is the way it is. Anything outside of that is wacky. And we get programmed from whatever, whether it's college or just the people around us, to see things a certain way. And it takes a special person to be able to see beyond that and challenge your own internal beliefs that you developed over your lifetime. And is there something better? And I think that's one of the cool things about all of us at Life 180 is a lot of us have been in that blinder world around IULs or wherever it is. And we've had to challenge those beliefs. So it was cool to see my dad open up a little bit to the other world that I was getting into with life insurance, but it was, in contrast, not as good because he never stepped fully into that. And then with his passing, he basically wrote himself off as being able to qualify for a life insurance policy because he had high blood pressure. And it was like, well, Dad, I know in the industry, you never decide for underwriting what they would decide for themselves about you. You never do that as an agent. So why would you ever do that as your own customer, right? You would never do that. So he didn't even have life insurance coverage. And the crazy part is 2 weeks after my dad passed, his older sister passed away, who was 17 years older. She did have a $10,000 life insurance that was just for burial coverage, because that's much of what we're taught is life insurance is there to bury you in the ground. And my dad didn't even have that. Now, fortunately, we were not in such a dire situation as a family, or it didn't really put us in a negative situation financially because we had to come up with extra money like many families do. You see the GoFundMes of, hey, my brother-in-law, 42, passed away of a heart attack or on the job, and we got to raise money to bury him. Like, that's a common thing in today's world. So that's definitely a place where life insurance can come in and add that. And we didn't experience that in our family. However, like I mentioned, 4 years ago when my father-in-law passed away, he had a basic term policy through work. So it wasn't at the level that any of us at Life 180 would be designing for our clients, but it was still, I think, like 250,000 or something along those, kind of a customary, sound like a really big number on paper, but when you actually apply it in your life, it's maybe doesn't go quite as far. But what that at least relatively small amount was able to do for my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, to be able to just pay down some debt and make a bigger leap forward after the fact. I can see now, being in it and in the middle of it with my side, like there wasn't that ability for my mom to pay off any remaining debt or have extra money to put into an annuity or into cash value life insurance or any other investments or upgrade home or whatever it was, put in a new driveway. They could definitely use a new driveway. There was none of that on the table. And because my dad had a good sized book of business, there was really no contingency plan though either. He wasn't planning to pass away at 66. He just came off open enrollment in December, 2 weeks before he had his second stroke. He was still working, planning to work for probably another 10 years or something. So for me, it made sense to step in and take over what my dad's business was, because it's very close to what we're already doing on the Life 180 side with financial strategies, wealth strategies, and using life insurance and annuities and other instruments that just help somebody reach their goals financially. So I'm in the process of taking over that business, which is back to the embracing what's coming, as a grounding moment for me too, of like, okay, I didn't have this on my vision board. I didn't have these handwritten goals of I want to become a health insurance agent. That wasn't on my radar screen. But what I did have for goals written down of where I know I'm going, this seemed to just fit into it. It just does. And when it's one of the principles I've learned in personal development is when you've spent the time figuring out who you are, what you want your goals to look like, what you want your life to look like, and you're working towards those things, how they manifest may not come in the way that you think, and probably won't come the way you think. They're going to come from left field and from behind you. And sometimes your success is tapping you on the shoulder going, psst, over here. And you're like, no, I'm going this way towards my goals and my success. And they're like, no, just psst, right behind you. Just turn around, stop, look. So sometimes those things happen. And I found that to be the situation with my dad's business of like, okay, wasn't what I would have drawn up in any form or fashion. I'd still prefer my dad to be here. I'd still prefer he does the health side and I continue on with building the life insurance side and financial strategies, but that's not where we're at. So I have to reintegrate to this is what life looks like. There's a lot of moving pieces with dad passing, like we've already discussed, but on the business front, it's like, okay, these are new opportunities for me. This is for me to take the legacy that my dad has built. And it was wonderful to see that at a funeral and have everybody sharing and talking about my dad and knowing that, okay, I can take what I bring to the mix. And I know a quote from Dr. Mercola years ago I heard is that you always build on the shoulder of giants. And so you take what your skill sets are, your passions, your purpose, you add them to what was there with the people that came before you, and you can serve people in a greater way. So that's what I'm embracing with my dad is like, okay, there's been some not fun things about all this, but I'm embracing what's coming. He's with me, like I've mentioned, in a new capacity. I'm going to be taking over his business and serving clients in a greater way than he was able to with where he was at in his own business development, his understanding of a lot of these products and things. And so I'm excited about that. But like I said, it's been interesting to look back though and go, if my dad 5-6 years ago, when we first learned about infinite banking, if he would have put together a policy that would have been like what we would have developed, the death benefit, I don't know exactly what it would have been, but probably would have exceeded $250,000. If they would have been able to, my mom and him put in some additional monies and stuff that they would have had in other accounts and guarded. I'm looking at that going like 300, 400, 500,000 just came into my family right now. Like what a difference that could have made right now in our family. Any debts that needed to be paid off could be paid off. You could put a bunch into whether it's cash value life insurance, you could get into real estate. Like there's a lot of options that come that would immediately up level our family in a dramatic way versus we're not harmed. We're not going backwards because of my dad's death, but we're also relatively staying the same, at least on paper with dollars, right? I mean, I've already spoke of the new direction we're going with my dad's business, but take that off the table. Like there was no influx of death benefit money that came into our family that immediately made a difference, that immediately up leveled our situation, my mom or me or my family. There wasn't that. And I can see like, wow, that's where what we do is so powerful. That's where the rubber meets the road, is when somebody does pass away, especially when it's premature, there's a lot of little things that don't get factored into what could the death benefit do. When you're sitting down with a life insurance agent 20 years prior, they don't know that your kids might be ready to go to school. You might not believe in the public school system, and you were trying to figure out a way to get them into private school, but it's $10,000 a year per student or $20,000 per year per student to go to that. And you might not have the financial resources. It might take you a year or two to build up to that. But what happens if you could somehow have a crystal ball and your life insurance agent could say, hey, but when you're going to need this policy, it's going to be the perfect time for your kids to go into private school. Or maybe it's to build a business. Hey, I need $100,000 to buy some excavators and bulldozers for a construction company or something. Like, you never know what those dollars can do. And yeah, it could be income replacement, but it could be, what is the whole family unit doing at the time of passing? And what are they doing in their life? What goals do they have that death benefit could work towards? And then just on the, if you don't have the energetic tools like we've already discussed, like going to find support and paying top dollar for a coach or a psychologist or somebody to help you navigate the emotions, like that's a factor. If the person that passed away is the main breadwinner, okay, well, if you've got a couple kids at home and now there isn't that death benefit, what would that mean? You'd have to have childcare. Maybe you need to have like a nanny come in or a house cleaner. Well, that's all extra expense that if you had a death benefit that could cover all those things, it's not just about replacing the income. It's replacing all the other areas of your life and looking at that. That's one of the things that I'm so grateful we've been trained to look more holistic and not so narrow-minded about it's a death benefit. It's on paper. It's just to replace your income. It's not there to serve any other parts of your life. Like, no, what if it's to buy supplements so you can feel better in your body as you're dealing with this emotional stress? Like stress depletes your magnesium levels. Well, I can go buy some magnesium supplements that maybe I couldn't afford before. Like, there's so many things that the death benefit can play into that can amplify a family and what their mission is. And maybe they don't have it all dialed in, but there's probably a member or two of a family that is more dialed in. They are aware of what they're doing and where they're going. And that death benefit can come in and serve such a vital role in the advancement of that. And that's one of the things I love about Garrett Gunderson, one of our industry leaders and industry mentors. He talks so much about that and the having a family purpose and having a vision for the family, not just one person individually, but like as they come together, what are we trying to accomplish in the world to serve and to add value? Like, that's a big conversation. The death benefit can do so much in that discussion to move the family forward. So that's a little bit more about my dad and how all this plays in and being able to compare and contrast. Like, okay, I can see what benefit there was with my father-in-law passing, and we didn't really get quite to that level with my dad with a death benefit that did come from my father-in-law. It wasn't there for my dad, and thinking through, wow, it could have made a difference, but that's not the path that was chosen. And it's a lesson in like, okay, if you have information, utilize it because it could make a big difference when it's needed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that. That's super powerful. And one thing that I think this conversation, especially where it started and where it's gone, an aspect of reality that we're all going to, and I respect everybody's beliefs, 100%. I respect everybody's beliefs and model of the world. And I think there is a lot of evidence and very good evidence at this point, and a lot of anecdotal evidence and now more measurable kind of evidence that shows that when we pass out of our bodies, when we go on to the next stage of life and we make that transition out of our body, life as we know it ends, but life does not end. Our spiritual life continues, our essence, who we are. We maintain our sense of self as we move on to the next stage of our experience beyond the body. And at some point, each of us is going to have that experience of realizing I'm no longer in my body, looking down, seeing your body in maybe a hospital room or whatever it is. Some of us will have already had that experience. I know psychedelics in sufficient doses can help somebody to have that experience prior to an actual death. I know ayahuasca has been called dress rehearsal for death. Yeah, very much so. And at some point, that's going to be a reality for everybody. And I know Caleb Williams talks about being the main speaker at your funeral. And I think that's a really beautiful and potent thought experiment. And the Stoics, like part of Stoic philosophy was that as well. Memento mori, meditate on your death. This has been an idea that's been around for a long time. When we hit that inevitable stage where our bodies expire and our spirit, the energetic aspect of ourselves becomes separate from our body, and before we fully embark on the next stage, there's going to be a period of time where we look back down at the situation where we left behind. And there's a Rosicrucian teacher and philosopher that I follow, Dr. Robert Gilbert, and he's very tapped in. And he talks about this when spirits do that, when they turn around and right after they leave the body, one of the main things that can be traumatic in that is when they look back and they realize, oh, I could have done more. Like, I didn't fulfill my purpose. I had the opportunity to make choices in my life that could have changed this scenario. I could have put money in an account. I could have started a life insurance policy. I could have done whatever that looks like. But I didn't do everything I could to prepare for this moment. And now that I'm not in my body, I'm looking back and I'm realizing, oh no, I could have done more. Like, I could have left my family in a different situation. Yes, they're always going to have to go through that grieving process. Yes, there's going to be sadness. Yes, there's going to be a sense of loss for everybody. Yes, that is an undeniable part of the experience. And we can take proactive steps while we are alive to ensure that our experience at the end of our life is going to have a certain quality to it. We'll never know what that death experience is like fully until we go through it and have that experience. So there's always going to be an aspect of unknown around it. And so many people live with just anxiety around death because of that unknown. Well, what would it be like if we could remove some of that anxiety by making proactive decisions now to ensure that when we get there to that moment in time and point in space, hopefully a long time down the road, when with a big family around us and a bunch of people who care about us, when we get to that point, we can make that transition knowing I'm not going to be a burden. I'm not going to leave a mess. My passing is going to facilitate, as you said, an up-leveling of my family. Like, I can do that, and I can be intentional about that. The unknown around death is always going to be there, but how much stress with all of my experiences, just seeing the amount of stress and anxiety that people carry around death. I mean, death is taboo in our society. We don't talk about it. When in a more traditional kind of society where there's more what I would think of like a natural cycle. So I've lived in India for a period of time. I spent a bunch of time in South America. In those cultures, when the grandparents can no longer be on their own, they don't get put into a home. They come back into their home with the family. And that's an opportunity for the young ones, the children coming up, to observe and experience watching your elders, like not only being able to have that incredible transfer of wisdom from the elders to the younger generation, but be able to witness that aspect of life. And it's an inevitable aspect for everybody. And our Western culture, I think it's really unfortunate that many young people are deprived of that experience, being able to firsthand witness that part of the life cycle and have that mental framework like, oh, this is coming. No matter what happens, this is coming, and this is a reality of life. And it's not necessarily scary. It's beautiful. I saw my grandparents go through it. And at some point in time, I'm going to be a grandparent, and I can transfer my wisdom to the next generations, and they'll be there for me as I was for them. Our culture, that there's something broken, like fundamentally, with removing that from the family and from the life cycle and our process. The fact that when people no longer become productive in society, out of sight, out of mind, put them in a home, I think that's absolutely tragic. Being able to integrate that experience is really powerful. I always just go back to what can we do now to ensure that even though death is taboo, because our culture has made it taboo, it's something that we're shielded from in a way. How can we start to reintegrate that and make that more of a meaningful conversation here and now, such that it gives us the framework and frame of mind, oh, I'm going to be there someday. What can I do to help me prepare for that? What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? Do I want to do what my parents did? They may have had different resources and a different upbringing. Can I change the course of the future generations of my family through intentionally living and dying in such a way that produces a predictable result that I want? To me, that is so powerful. And just that frame of mind, I didn't have that frame of mind for a long period of time. And it wasn't right or wrong. Looking back at it now, quite frankly, there were parts of my psyche that were not developed, and I didn't do enough reflection in that kind of a way, that kind of self-reflection. What do I want to leave behind? I was more focused on myself and less focused on people around me. And as I've gotten older, things are shifting, and I'm starting to see it from this different perspective. And I recognize now that at that point in my development, it just wouldn't, life insurance would not have made sense for me. The kind of conversation we're having now would not have made sense. Thinking about what I want to leave behind would not have made sense to me. And moving forward, as I mature, not only does this make sense to me, this is a fundamental responsibility I feel like I'm taking on, and I must take on, in order to ensure that I leave this world a better place. So I'm curious what that brings up for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when my wife and I first got married. My dad did have the background in insurance, and he had told us to get a term life insurance policy. And he didn't know about convertible term, I don't think, back then, because I'm fast forward 11 years and I'm thinking I still have my term policy. It's still relatively cheap. It did go up last year because it was a 10-year term. I think it went up from $29 to $96 a month for both me and my wife for $250,000 of coverage. So I still have that. But looking back, okay, that could have been done better with better knowledge. We could have done better, right? We did the best we could with the knowledge we had at the time. So great. We had that. And 6 months after my wife and I were married, we were down in Florida for a bioenergetic conference, and we got struck by a car on foot the night before the conference. And I woke up there. I have a 15-hour gap. I have zero memory. My last memory is crossing. It was a divided highway. There was a strip of grass between the west and eastbound or whatever direction it was. I remember taking the first few steps towards that grass. My next memory is 15 hours later, strapped to a board in a cement room. It looked like it wasn't even to me, it didn't look like a hospital. Literally my first thought was, did I get abducted by aliens or something? Because I had no idea where I was at, why I was there. Well, once the nurse told me what was going on, that both my wife and I had been hit by a car the night before, I'm like, holy crap, it could have been where either one of us were killed, or maybe both of us. But if one of us had been killed, at least I had a death benefit. So that's where term comes in, right? To do that. But then fast forward, we learned about all this. I have my whole life policy. I'm about ready to start my 7th year of my whole life policy. And I don't know exactly where my statement will show here in a couple months when it comes, but I know I'll be north of $600,000 of death benefit. So I started that policy in June of 2018, I think it was. And from that moment on, my subconscious thoughts even around my family, because at the time we had a son, now we've got a son and a daughter. They're both young. And when you're faced with death, it brings up a different perspective, right? Okay, well, my dad just passed. There's no guarantees I have tomorrow. Do I have everything set in place for me in my life? Well, I can feel good. I sleep better at night knowing I do. If I get struck by lightning with the severe storms they're supposed to move through Michigan here later this afternoon, I know my family is going to be taken really well care of. It will more than replace my income. It will more than pay off all of the remaining student loans and vehicles and everything that we have. My family will be set not just for the next year or so, but for life, because they not only have the death benefit, they know what to do with a large sum of money to perpetuate it, to grow it, to multiply it, how to put that money to work. And that's something that we're not trained at the middle class level of how do you take an asset like a life insurance payout or a settlement. If you have a car accident or something, you get a big lump sum. There's different ways we get money. We're not trained to do with it. After the accident that I mentioned my wife and I were in, we had a hefty settlement that we got out of that. We didn't know what to do with it. So it was gone in less than a year. And I look back and go, that was one of the biggest financial mistakes I've made. That, and when I had sold a landscaping business back in 2010, same thing. Huge amount of money came in. Didn't know what to do with it. Gone in a matter of months. And you look back like, how did I spend so much money so fast? Well, that's the level of consciousness we had around money. And so when you're faced with the death conversation and how do you want to leave your family, there are tools you can put in place that I love what Chris Kirkpatrick says, our mentor from Life 180. Permanent life insurance is the only product available that will ensure what you want will happen when you want it to happen. And that is part of the future planning. It's not fun to think about death. It's not fun to think about how sad my kids will be when I pass. Put your big person pants on. Like, it's okay to focus on the emotions and feel the emotions. We already said breathe through them, get some energy work done on that to help you through it. But then literally sit down with your family and make a plan. What do we want this process to look like? How do we want this outcome to be? When we get to that point, it goes back to like, okay, this old school life insurance sales, but it's absolutely true. If something were to happen, do you want to be worse off, the same, or better with the unexpected passing of a loved one or a spouse? Like, well, everybody would say, I want to be in a better position, right? Who wants to be worse? Most of us, many might say, I'm okay with staying the same. But most people would choose, they'd raise their hand to, I want to be better. Well, then let's put a plan in place that you have 100% certainty that you will be in a better position, and factor in things like inflation between now and when that could happen. And I look at that I mentioned my aunt had passed away 2 weeks after my dad. When they bought that life insurance policy for $10,000, that was supposed to pay for a full burial with a casket, service, the whole bit. Well, fast forward 10 or 15 years, inflation's gone so much that $10,000 barely got her cremated and everything done. So those are things you have to think about. And that's part of the planning that goes into it of, okay, do you have the right plan with a life insurance policy? The death benefit, is it sized appropriately to meet your goals, to not only just replace your income, but up-level your family in a way? And in the agency that we came from, they always taught that whole life insurance is the only instrument where you get a multiplication from generation 1 to generation 2. You might have $1 million of cash value in your whole life policy, but there's probably $1.25 million, $1.5 million, $2 million of death benefit that gets transferred. So while you're alive, you get to use the cash value, your $1 million in that policy, but then the next generation is going to get more than that. Every other financial instrument or strategy is going to be a reduction that the next generation gets to utilize because of taxes, because of fees, because of government getting their portion. So that is how you can up-level. That's what I'm speaking of, an actual financial up-leveling that can take place from generation 1 to generation 2, and it can be perpetuated onward. Like I said, I was just listening to a podcast this morning with Matt Love and Garrett Gunderson, both insurance guys and finance guys, and they were talking about Garrett's going to be a part of a documentary coming up where they're talking about a family that's 14 generations they've been using trusts and life insurance, and some of that didn't even exist that far back, to perpetuate wealth. And we know the Rockefellers, they've done it for 6 generations. So there's things that we can put in place with better knowledge, better tools, and sometimes it's using the same tools that we're taught, but using them in a different way, in a better way, in a more, I like to use the word consciousness, in a more conscious way, in a higher consciousness way, instead of seeing a life insurance contract as burial coverage or income replacement. Well, can we utilize that same tool with a different framework, with a different mindset, and get more out of that same tool that's going to do more for us in our lifetime and for our generations to come? Well, the answer happens to be yes, we can. And that's one of the grateful things we have that knowledge and ability to do for our clients, is be able to take what seems like a very old school, boring product that's a hole you throw your money into if you listen to certain talking heads in financial media, and we can turn it into much more than that, and we can replicate what the wealthy are using of what's that basic product and make it something that can actually manifest that future goal of, where do I want my family to be after I'm gone? Where do I want my kids' economic level to be after me and my wife are gone? Are we going to set them up on a trajectory for an increase beyond what we were able to do. One of my mentors in the marketing space, Joel Bauer, he always talked about that he believes that as parents, it's our responsibility to do everything in our power to make sure that our kids can live out their purposes. And a lot of that goes back to financially. Are we putting our kids on a track financially so that they have the ability and the awareness to discover themselves, who they are, stay in that? Because so many people get lost in the journey of growing up and taking on other people's beliefs and going down other tracks. But if we can stay in that and then execute that, give them the financial resources to maximize whatever their purpose is. And maybe it's working capital for them to grow a business or do apprenticeship work or whatever it looks like. But finances is not the reason that they can't do it, right? We provide every opportunity and every tool that we can in our power so that they're able to take things to the next level. And that's something that my wife and I have been, again, blessed with that kind of information to try to do our best to bring our children up in that type of energy. My wife was just having her conversation the other day with our son about that kind of thing of like, you go back to like our grandparents on both sides of the family and the trials that they dealt with and the dynamic in the marriage and the financial struggles. And then you go down to like our parents, which would be our kids' grandparents. Okay, things got better there, but these areas still needed to get tightened up and better and improved. And then like with us, okay, obviously nobody's going to be perfect, but there's a noticeable progression that every generation is getting closer and closer to a more of a fulfillment of a greater purpose, right? That you can see generationally. We're not wanting to just repeat the same financial mistakes and the same health mistakes and same marriage mistakes. Like you're getting better with every single generation. And I just feel like life insurance is such a vital tool to allow our kids to advance in whatever area they want to, not only in our lineage, but just in how they serve the world. So I know that's like that's a big topic, but I mean, I believe it so wholeheartedly. And that's what makes me so passionate about life insurance is like growing up after high school, I spent a lot of time in personal development. And one of the big things I saw in that industry, in those teachings was a lot of times they would tell you financially to go back to stocks and bonds and mutual funds. And I always thought there's got to be another financial system that's on par with my beliefs create my reality, and I can, manifest my goals, dreams, and desires. And you're learning all this stuff, but then you're taught to, once you get yourself dialed in and there's money flowing in because of your abundance energy is attracting it, then you're just going to put it back into stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And there was always like a disconnect with that. And then when I learned about more of the advanced way of using whole life insurance and a lot of things that go along with that, I'm like, okay, to me, that's more on par with using the power of your mind to create your own reality and see the bigger lessons in life and see the generational impact that you can have and the purposes that you might have. And to me, it just is a more completing full plan, as we talked about already, like all the different aspects of life. Now with life insurance, it can fit in that financial segment, whereas law of attraction and alternative healing fit into health and your personal growth and your spiritual growth and your relationships. Like, okay, now I've got like the trifecta of really good tools, really good resources to become the best I can in all those areas.
Well, that was awesome. You just tied it all up. You brought it back. You touched on what we talked about in the beginning. You wove it all together and you really put a nice little bow on that. It was a very mic drop moment there at the end. I'm quite frankly, I don't think that I have anything else to say. That was really powerful. And I feel motivated and inspired to continue to do that, the work that we do. Even more so now because of the conversation we just had and everything that you said there at the end was so poignant and so true about being able to have a greater impact and improve generationally and do that intentionally, where we have the ability to do that if we take responsibility for ourselves, our financial situations, our health, our spiritual and psychological, emotional selves, like looking at everything holistically and learning from the past generations and honoring what they went through and what they experienced and what they contributed to be able to get us to where we are today, and then continue to build upon that. And what can we do for future generations? And what can we do to ensure that the next generations will continue to live that and perpetuate that legacy of continuous improvement and building upon what we've done in the past? Beautifully said, my friend. I'm so appreciative of this time and your willingness to come onto the show. This was everything that I was thinking it might be and some more.
Awesome.
So Jeff, you have your own podcast, the Wealth Energetics podcast.
Yep.
Correct? Perfect. I'll link all of Jeff's social media where you can get a hold of him, his YouTube channel, his podcast. I'll link that all below. And yeah, man, I'm super appreciative of, again, your willingness to come on and the conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to share before we part ways?
No, I mean, I think we could just keep going and going. So we probably better cut it at this. And if we have more to say, we better do a second episode. But no, it's been a great discussion. I think, like I said in the beginning, I was excited for this conversation, and I think it did blossom into more than I thought it would as well. So hopefully this has been a good thing for people and the listeners on your channel to think about some things from a different perspective and not just talk life insurance and cash value and riders and all that. But I think this is just really where the rubber meets the road on where life happens and how what we do on the financial side has such a ripple effect in all other areas of our life, whether it's our health, whether it's our relationships, the legacy that we live. Like, it is just such a foundational piece that can amplify all those other areas. So that's why I like to bring it home to that and not just focus on the financial tool, but really the applicable, tangible aspects of our life that really make the difference in the quality of life we lead and how fulfilled we are. And the financial strategies definitely play into that. And life insurance is a part of the financial strategies. So you can't separate those out. And it's really part of, if you have the longing to grow and expand and evolve as a person spiritually and in your body and in your pursuits and your business, all these things come into play. And just the more you can up level all those areas, you're going to get there. And what I'm saying might sound amazing and like I'm perfect. Like, dude, we're all a work in progress, right? I mean, all these things, you take what you've got, you learn from it, you grow, you try to get better. And you're going to have episodes where I didn't really grow a whole lot this month. Maybe I went back a step, but that's just part of the journey. And I think just sharing this information is good for helping everybody on their own journey, be reminded of the things that we might know cognitively that we forget about. Like, oh yeah, I do need to get back on track here. And just want to share what's been my story and my journey, and hopefully it can help other people. So appreciate the conversation. I'm glad to be on and looking forward to many more.
Yeah, man, I'm super appreciative of your willingness to share such personal information. And I know that people are going to be touched by your story, and I'm looking forward to the next conversation. But until then, everyone out there, take care and be well.